Muy bien. Esta pregunta abarca los paneles del 1 al 4 de la exposición, centrados en los paneles 2 y 3. Llamamos Casa Bogotana Moderna a la realizada por encargo privado entre 1945 y 1965, que interpreta los valores espaciales de la estructura del hall intermedio. El panel 2 muestra que esta estructura espacial fue utilizada indistintamente por el mismo estudio de arquitectura en casas de estilo neocolonial y moderno. El panel 3 presenta la recurrencia de la estructura del hall intermedio y sus interpretaciones. Mientras que en Norteamérica la posguerra estableció una domesticidad sin servicio doméstico y la sala, el comedor y la cocina se integraron en un solo espacio, en estas casas modernas de Bogotá, las partes adyacentes a los pasillos fueron discriminadas y asignadas a áreas de servicio o privadas. John, ¿qué opinas de los planteamientos de los paneles 2 y 3 y su representación gráfica?
Thank you very much. I would just say very briefly, I'm fascinated by this hangover within the context of Bogota buildings. I mean, the great change in Western European living after the war is, of course, the decline in domestic service. And that is what revolutionizes and forces the modernist movement really to collapse houses into, with single interiors or massively reduced interiors, where with all these mod cons that allow you to live comfortably, the vacuum cleaner, the kettle, all these other things, you don't need domestic servants. But of course, what you're seeing clearly in Bogota is the continuance of domestic service, and therefore of building types that in other parts of the world are simply impossible to sustain.
Me gustaría comentar que la denominada Casa Moderna Bogotana fue desarrollada ampliamente durante los 20 años acotados en función de las condiciones de su ubicación, de las posibilidades normativas y de la inquietud de sus autores. Asimismo, tuvo como resultado un diverso repertorio a partir de las nuevas relaciones espaciales y conexiones con el exterior, en las cuales fue recurrente la estructura del hall intermedio, entendida en su sentido más abstracto. Trajo consigo la construcción de un imaginario colectivo que promovía su deber ser y representar, así como la búsqueda de estrategias espaciales y formales que reflejaran los valores de la nueva producción arquitectónica local que, a juicio de sus autores, era moderna. En el panel 2, titulado Arquitectos y Clientes, se evidencia con algunos ejemplos publicados en las revistas locales como Proa o Casas y Lotes, que a finales de los años 40 era factible encontrar la construcción simultánea de una casa de estilo inglés o neocolonial al lado de otra moderna, incluso diseñada y construida por los mismos arquitectos. Hábilmente se podía dar gusto al cliente en las características más epiteliales, mientras se exploraba en la interpretación de estructuras espaciales como la del hall intermedio, conocida por sus creadores en ocasiones inclusive a partir de su experiencia de vida en las casas de los años 30. Este panorama cambió rápidamente, pues para finales de los años 50, la Casa Moderna Bogotana tenía mucha mayor aceptación dentro de la élite y esto permitió que sus autores tuvieran una línea de trabajo más homogénea y coherente. El protagonismo se trasladó entonces del cliente al arquitecto, quien no solamente diseñaba la casa según sus intereses, sino que incidía en la elección del lugar de su construcción, del mobiliario, de la decoración, promoviendo entonces todo un nuevo modo de vida acorde con la época.
Las casas bogotanas más ricas, que toman como modelo la casa a la inglesa, heredan también el modelo social que desean imitar. Esto comporta contar con sala de recibir, biblioteca, comedor, sala de familia, sala de juego, etc. Piezas de gran tamaño y con una individualidad definida. Incluso se conserva el ritual de que cada miembro de la pareja tenga su propio dormitorio. No pueden faltar entonces el servicio doméstico, que se suma a los habitantes de la casa con sus habitaciones. En estas casas de que hablamos, el hall intermedio tiene dos cometidos: impresionar al visitante y hacer de enorme distribuidor en el que la escalera posee a veces un tamaño y desarrollo desmesurados. En cierto sentido, están alejadas del modelo canónico inglés, donde el hall, además de distribuir, evocó largo tiempo que representaba la casa entera, el hogar. En el panel 2 se observa que algunas casas modernas son una mera versión estilizada del modelo inglés bogotano. En otro grupo, el hall sirve para establecer una rica articulación espacial de las piezas de la planta baja, conforme a una condensación de los rituales de la vida doméstica que comporta que no haya una habitación para cada ocasión. O bien pasa a ser el living room, en otros casos, la sala de familia donde sus miembros conviven y reciben a sus amistades. La escalera, cuando existe, sublima su rol distributivo con el espacial. Los arquitectos de aquellos años, hay que tener en cuenta esto, recibieron una educación mozartiana y conocían los estilos de catálogo, de modo que podían interpretar cualquier partitura. En estos años, la arquitectura moderna ya está en su etapa madura y se ha codificado como un estilo más.
John, there are a couple of things I'd concentrate on here, but one of them is very specific to your own expertise as a highly experienced architectural editor. And that is that you will have noticed straight away that one of the big differences between the set of images that you're seeing of the mid-century Bogota houses and the previous ones we saw is the role of photography in representing those houses. And so the first point that I'd like to make here is whether you might like to comment on how the plan of houses, modernist houses, I suppose in the proper sense of the word, how it falls in love with photography and how photography is influencing it in return, and so that you create, in these cases, you can certainly create halls which might be small in plan, but which are going to appear intriguing to the average magazine reader. That's the first thing. The second thing is a more slightly narrower museographical point, which is that we're interested also in whether you feel that the images that are being projected at the moment, the ones that are connected to panel 3, to section 3 of the exhibition, whether they are the right way of presenting this argument. In other words, as somebody coming to the exhibition from outside, whether you might see a connection between the pink spaces in the historic houses, which we know much better, and these ones that you see now, whether it seems to you that there is a continuous story going on here. So those are, I think, points which for sure have clearly got a specific Bogota connection, but they're also generally true, I think, of the way in which the white houses of the 30s, 40s, 50s are developing. And of course, there is a situation in Colombia, as there is in some other countries that were outside the immediate orbit of the Second World War, which is that the 1920s, 30s designs go on developing fairly continuously without the interruption of the war in the middle.
Thank you. I think it's fascinating to see these modernist buildings. This emphasis I laid in the introduction on service and the way in which it transforms domestic life and modern appliances too, and modern materials. I say modern, but of course modernism now, as those photographs underline, is now really a style in its own right and well over a century old itself. That in fact all these things become part and parcel of a revolution in lifestyle. And what is so fascinating is that houses where that revolution in lifestyle hasn't taken place adopt the forms of that revolution, but they maintain the plans and the interiors of an earlier lifestyle. It's sort of a fascinating example of style driving forward changes which are not really following in the lived experience within those houses. I think the questions that Timothy raises are very fascinating. I mean, you're absolutely right, of course, that photography really since the turn of the 20th century has had a transformative effect on architecture. It is the art form that architects turn to relay their architectural ideas in the published form. I mean, it is also fascinating that the initial adoption of all these very English forms, I mean, I presume it absolutely must be through the medium of publications and drawings that are coming to Bogota and that people are seeing. I imagine that almost nobody who's building a house in late 19th century Bogota has traveled widely in England. I may be completely wrong. I'm sure there are some people who have, but many of these house patrons presumably are dealing with their architects and working almost exclusively through what are already very widespread publications and plans. But photography, I think, does mark another major shift. And with photography, the technology to print high quality photographs, which of course in the 19th century, although photography is already widespread in the late 19th century, the ability to reproduce images in quantity from photographs is almost impossible. So hence the use of engravings and other typographic forms to publish material. Modernism has a very strange relationship with photography. I mean, it seems to me that making interiors look attractive, I notice even now, when I have dealings with new houses, architects very frequently want them photographed before they've been lived in, because the implication is that the owners will just spoil them and get in the way, and leave clutter all over the place. And of course, this is absolutely true, but it's a mark of whether a house works or not, as to whether it can sustain clutter and life. A merely perfect house in the modernist form is almost a Platonic ideal, I sometimes think. And of course, photography has the potential to capture that Platonic ideal. And I think it does influence the way modernism strives for light interiors, because of course you can't photograph dark interiors very beautifully. There are all kinds of qualities of interiors that you lose in photography, or at least which are much more difficult to capture. So I think photography has really reshaped the way we look at architecture, that we reflexively turn towards it. It has to be used, I think, with great caution as a medium, because it, I think, conceals space. I mean, the wide-angle lens is an extraordinarily powerful tool, as we know from estate agents when they're trying to sell you a very small house, which looks enormous within the context of a sales brochure. So it is a very distorting thing. In response to Timothy's second question, to what extent are these interiors recognizable through time? It was actually something I was going to bring up in summary. I mean, as you will have gathered, I think that what you've done in this exhibition is formalize a problem. And I think formalizing it is really fascinating, and it illuminates all kinds of things. But maybe I will annoy people by saying that if I walked into some of the modernist interiors we've just been shown, and to look at them, and then to walk into Penshurst Place, would I think of them as the same interiors? Probably not. But having said that, it strikes me that the desire to create impressive entrances to houses, that desire to dignify thresholds, to make a house seem grand, and also internally to interconnect its elements, a hall is a natural solution. It becomes a formal space of greeting and welcome that serves practical function of interconnecting rooms within the house. And it is a space, of course, that you want to dignify. It's important that it looks impressive. And that concern to dignify the entrance to a house ultimately is what informs both Penshurst Place and some of the modernist buildings we've looked at. And I mean, I think as somebody, maybe Mark Gerard, I can't remember, pointed out, we do call in English the entrance to the house a hall for this very reason. So they are connected over time, even if they look different.